hate to bring down that beautiful score, but I want to bring our filmmaker up to the stage and just say about this film, wow, the more things change, the more they stay the same, huh? So, Lauren, if you make your way here, I don't know where she went. Oh, there she is, sorry. So please join me in welcoming writer-director Lauren Greenfield and our moderator, journalist Jazz Tankay, the senior artisans editor at Variety. Welcome, Jazz.
Hello, good to see you, Lauren. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Oh my gosh, I'm just gobsmacked after watching this again, like after so long. I think, Lauren, you and I sat down originally in 2019, so The Kingmaker was first released then, and you've just watched it again. What was that like, revisiting The Kingmaker, given everything that has happened in the world since 2019?
It was actually really strange, and I have to say it was kind of hard to watch tonight with what's happening in our country right now. But even the way I wrote it at the end, where it says Bong Bong might be poised for power, I mean, we kind of were going out on a limb as a cautionary tale. And of course, in 2022, Bong Bong became the president of the Philippines. And not only that, but his son became a congressman, Sandro, who voted for 2 presidents. And Imelda's nephew is Speaker of the House, and Imelda's daughter Amy is governor. Her son is senator, or actually the other way around. So they're controlling all of the branches of government now.
So she's got exactly what she wanted.
She got exactly what she wanted, yeah. And she got back to Malacañan. And what Andy Bautista said was so prescient, because they have so thoroughly whitewashed the sins of the past that even Biden met with him in April and said the Philippines and the U.S. have momentum in their new relationship. And Andy Bautista, who was the one going after the ill-gotten wealth, and it's just like this, like when you say black is white and white is black enough times, people start believing it. He is now been indicted by the Southern District of Florida for money laundering, with his ex-wife, who's a Marcos crony, leading that. And so he's still hasn't been able to see his children in the Philippines since 2016. And meanwhile, Bong Marcos, who has a $350 million contempt case against him in the U.S., is now able to come to our country because he has immunity.
It's so wild. But I want to talk about Imelda, because she is not the most reliable narrator, as we see. And if you know that, talk about sitting down with her to make The Kingmaker, and hearing those words and just her rewrite her own history.
I mean, I think I was very lucky to get to sit down with her, because when I started, it was this moment where they were not in power, and she was nostalgic for power and attention. And so she kind of just let me in to interview her without a lot of handlers or no publicists, nothing like that. And she's kind of a filmmaker's dream, because she just says it all. She says exactly what she thinks, no holds barred. The thing that's tricky is she just tells her version of the story, which is kind of a magic realism of untruths. Which at the time seemed crazy, but as I got into it, I realized was actually a very strategic remaking of history. And so I loved talking to her and having her say all of these things, but I realized that the audience believes that the person being interviewed in a documentary film. And so I had to really craft a way for the audience to know what the truth was. And so I ended up bringing in these other voices that I called kind of the truth tellers, like the victims of martial law, Andy Bautista, Aquino, who could kind of puncture Imelda's story, and we could still kind of hear it from her voice.
The one thing, that opening sequence when she's there doing that Evita moment, giving money out to the children. And again, it's like crafting this narrative. What was that like being there with her, watching her do that? And just, being in the room where it happens.
I mean, every time I was with her, I didn't know if I would ever be with her again, because when you're with somebody like that, you are working at the pleasure of her. And you never know if you're going to be invited back. And that was the very first shoot. And we were in that bus, and she has all this money. And I'm like, great, let's shoot the money. And then the window opens, and it's just the thing that was so interesting and kind of powerful about it for me is there were so many things that I saw that in a way were echoes of the kind of corruption or the importance of money and politics that we see in other countries, even our own. But there it was so just on the surface of things. So we know, that politics, that you need money to win, but there you can actually just pay people for votes. And she would just walk around with wads of cash. And I tried to construct it so, like in the beginning, you didn't know if she was just a nice lady giving money to cancer patients. And then, you realize it's the stolen money that they're, doling out dollar by dollar.
You mentioned the truth tellers that really counter this portrait of this woman. How did you go about finding who would be the right people to counter everything and retell and tell the story as it really should have been told?
Yeah, well, I came into the story through an article that I read about Malawi. I started with kind of the animal island, so I didn't know I was going to get swept up in a political story about the present. But luckily, we had this amazing Filipino producer, Marissa Politan, who had some kind of connection to the Marcos through her family, so they trusted her. But really, she was an activist, an anti-Marcos activist from the People Power time. And so she introduced me to all of those people. And they were like much easier to get access, and they were really open and kind of wanting to tell their story. But I really kind of kept the two sides apart. I did tell them that I was interviewing the Marcoses, but they kind of could believe it. And the interesting thing too about them is they also never believed that they would come back to power. It's like Etta says in the beginning, the Filipino people will never allow it. So they were also kind of didn't take her as seriously as she should have been taken. It's like when she says, as a woman, you're not taken seriously. Sometimes that can work for you. And they also, like, between the shoes and the dotty old woman, there was a kind of a harmless kind of image of her. And I think that's why, and the Filipinos are a very forgiving people, as a couple people said. And so they kind of let her come back, an old lady let her come back to the country without realizing that they were capable of rising to power and using the stolen money to get there.
I'm curious, why do you think she's so idolized, given everything that she has done, and Mark and her husband, what they did to that country? They still idolize her. What is being taught in school is barely anything. So why does she have, and the whole Marcos, what's this obsession?
I mean, I think there's kind of the cult of celebrity and beauty. She says, like, I'm the star in the dark of night. Like, she has palaces all over the country, or she did. They're all falling apart now and were sequestered. But she always said that the palaces are for the people to kind of enjoy. And her being so beautiful was for the people to enjoy. But I think the really big thing strategically is most of the voters were under 40, and most of them did not remember martial law. And the Marcoses did a really brilliant campaign in social media, but also in school and all kinds of propaganda starting in the 2000s to remake their image. And they did it successfully. A lot of the Filipinos get their news from Facebook because that's where they can get free news. And on Facebook, they could tell the story the way they wanted to tell the story. So a lot of young people, like you saw in the school, believe that that was the golden age. And also, as Etta said, the subsequent presidents weren't able to lift the people from the poverty that was also from the Marcoses stealing so much money.
As I said at the beginning, you made this in 2019, and I feel ever since then, like democracy around the world, not just here, seems to be hanging by a thread. Talk about that a little bit, and because this is a warning, if anything, like don't let history repeat itself. And there are lots of documentaries out there that do that, but talk about that in relation to the Kingmaker and the message that you wanted to send.
I mean, it's really scary. When I did this, it was about kind of a cautionary tale about the fragility of democracy and how easy it is for authoritarian regimes to rise. But I didn't really think that we would be facing that. And there's a lot of similarities. Like one of the things after Bong Bong lost the 2016 election, he said for 5 years he had been cheated. He should have won. The election was stolen. And he used that to kind of get votes and stay in the news. And then in this film, we actually broke the story of the alliance between Duterte and the Marcoses. And then that was their genius in 2022 is he partnered with Duterte's daughter, Sarah, just like the Mr. and Mrs. Marcos did. He was from the north and she was from the south. And together they were unstoppable. And so all of the shenanigans that he was trying after the election, he ended up not needing. He just, propaganda, disinformation, and this incredible alliance was enough to sweep in. And yeah, I think it is really scary. Like they own, their family owns the newspapers. There were just articles that were squashed about Imelda's nephew, Romualdez, and now he's using the U.S. to really prop up his kind of status in the Philippines and also in the world. And with Duterte, just the rise of the strongman and how fast that happened. And I think, we see that a little bit now with Trump and also with what Trump threatens kind of openly in terms of, the kinds of fascist ways that Marcos had. I mean, the young Marcos did not end up doing as much. He's not as much of an authoritarian kind of leader as Duterte. He's actually doing a really good job of whitewashing himself into a real leader. Now he has the billions of dollars. He doesn't have to lie, cheat, and steal. He can come over here and be a invited guest by the president.
What was the toughest interview to get on that, and especially like on the truth teller side?
On the truth teller side, probably President Aquino, because he was the president then. And but he really disliked the Marcoses. And so I think he did like to have that chance. Pete LaCaba was hard to get to because he was older. But for the most part, the activists were very open. I think the Remedios, the old woman on the island, because with the indigenous people, there's a very elaborate process in terms of getting to film with them. And on the island, there's no cell service. There's no like food or water. We were camping. And so I would say she was probably the hardest.
Talk about, I mean, I was revisiting it again the other day, and I found it so fascinating how you actually framed Imelda, like this gold backdrop, with this portrait that she has of herself hanging, behind her. Like, talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious.
Well, first of all, since you're asking about the color of it, I want to introduce my colorist, Billy Hobson, who's here.
Yay, give it up for Billy.
And also my producer, Frank Evers, and who's also my husband, who's back there.
Yay.
I really tried to, I come from photography. I'm a photographer, and I always was fascinated by this idea of Imelda. That's kind of how I came to the story. And I didn't even know she was alive. And then I never thought she would give access. So when I went to film her, it was kind of like a kid in a candy store. There's gold everywhere. There's Picasso paintings behind her. There's a throne like the Queen of Versailles. And I just really tried to do a kind of what we call in photography an environmental portrait, where in a way what's around her says as much about her as what she says. And because she's so manipulative and she's in such control, and I'm like, really need to kind of go with whatever she wants, I tried to capture the stuff around the edges. So like the maid moving the statue, or her saying like, how does my stomach look? And everybody kind of carrying her. And, when she was showing all of the leaders / dictators that she was friends with, and then she just drops the glass and it breaks and somebody picks it up. So it was just kind of subversive moments to kind of show kind of her character and also the power that she had in relation to the people around her.
We're going to take a couple of audience questions, but I want to know, like, when you sat down with her, at what point did you realize that, what was the thing that she said to you that was like, oh, hang on a second, she's just not good. She's just like telling a lie.
Well, it was the truth and it was the lie that kind of floored me. I mean, the first time I interviewed her, she said that comment about, I asked, so Bill Malloy was a writer who had written the story about Kalauea, and he was the one who kind of helped me get in. And I asked him before the interview, what should I not ask her? Like, I don't want to rub her the wrong way. I don't want to lose access. And he was like, you can really ask her anything. And Filipinos are kind of like that. They'll answer. And so I asked her what happened with Benigno Aquino. And when she said, I didn't kill him, like, why would I do that? I had no problem with him except that he talked too much. I was just like, it was kind of amazing. I think in terms of the thing, like the biggest lie that I just couldn't believe is when she said martial law was the greatest time, and it was the greatest time for human rights. And I tried to kind of progress in the lies so that people would know how to read her, like starting with, I had a wonderful marriage, and then we know Marcos had a lot of affairs, and then she said nobody was on the island of Kalauea, and then we hear that she kicked off 150 families. So then by the time she says, martial law was the greatest time, the audience knows how to read it.
Amazing, amazing. All right, let's get some audience questions. If you've got a question, raise your hands. We've got moderators. We've got somebody on the left and on the right.
Have you had any interactions with the Marcoses since the film was released, and do you know what their interpretation or reaction has been since it's come out?
Well, I don't think they're fans of the movie. The thing that was amazing, actually, that happened was when it came out in the U.S., I did it for Showtime for U.S. distribution, knowing that it may never see the light of day in the Philippines, especially under Duterte, where there was a lot of censorship. And they ended up letting the film go there. And actually, the premiere was at the Cultural Center, which was a building that Imelda built. But in the theatrical world, that was a relatively small audience. I mean, the victims of martial law came. There were a lot of tears in the audience. A lot of people from that generation wanting their kids and grandchildren to see it because they felt like they weren't learning about martial law. So they were really kind of happy to have it as testimony and started showing it at universities. But in the run-up to the election, to the presidential election between Bongbong Marcos and Leni Robredo, the opposition really wanted the film to be seen, and they ended up helping to translate it into 10 languages. And it got also just completely pirated in the Philippines, which we were fine with. And everybody just saw it. Like, it just got completely saturated in the Philippines, which I was really happy about, to the point of, like, in a hospital, like I was in a hospital with my father, and the Filipino nurse was like, "You made the Kingmaker." Like, I'll call a call center for American Express, and they'll be like, "Oh, you made the Kingmaker." Like, it really got around there, which was really gratifying. The interesting thing about the Marcos, to answer your question, is they never responded. You know, no lawsuits, no comments. I think that they really know how to handle this after many years of experience. The one thing that they did do was, it was going to be on TV in the Philippines, on ABS-CBN, which is kind of like the CNN of the Philippines. And the Congress, with Martin Romualdez, Imelda's nephew, as the Speaker of the House, took away the license of ABS-CBN before they could show it. And so, and now actually they own part of ABS-CBN.
There you go.
Okay, couple of questions on your right.
We can
Are
get
you
some
going
more
to be going
questions on-
back? Are you going to be going back to the Philippines with no issues? First question. Second question, and however you want to answer. Is it as easy as it was before to call for one person to rule in martial law now, or have the laws changed at all? Do you know?
Well, for martial law, I mean, one of the things that did change was Marcos was the president for 20 years, and after People Power in 1986, they changed the law so that you could only be a president for one term. So you can't stay on. What hasn't changed is the whole political dynasty thing. So a lot of times you'll see, like Imelda's nephew was the governor of Leyte, where she's from, and after he finished his term, his wife became the governor. So there's a lot of that. So no, it's not as easy. On the other hand, Duterte there were extrajudicial killings again with abandon and no consequences. I have not been to the Philippines since I made the film, and neither has Andy Bautista. And I think it will be a new government before I go there.
I was going to ask you, in making this, what did you learn about yourself as a filmmaker?
Well, it was a really big challenge to do this in another country, and also to tell a story that wasn't my own in a way. So I really relied on the partnership of the Filipinos that we were working with, and it was a very exciting collaboration that way, because Imelda probably only talked to me because I was a foreigner, but their insight allowed me to kind of get both sides of it. I'm not like a super adventurer kind of photojournalist or filmmaker, and so being on the island with the camping and the pythons and the waking up to the giraffes and the zebras was very challenging. And then they're scary people, and so it just kind of tested, my kind of how far I was willing to go to tell the story, and it was kind of it was a great challenge also to follow the political campaign, because I did not expect it to be this kind of news story, and so it also was very exciting to kind of capture this in a breaking news kind of way.
Did you ever get did anybody ever attempt to stop you from making the film at all?
No, but nobody really knew what we were doing when we were doing it. And even when we filmed the street killings after Duterte had just become president, at that time, they were proud of it. They were the police were showing us, like, there was no shame in that. And I think 6 months later, they, were not as excited about journalists covering that. But, it was just so amazing. I feel like when the doors open, you just have to walk through it. And when I went to Imelda's house, the family home, which is not even theirs anymore, it was owned by the government. It was sequestered, but they just use it as theirs. It's like possession is 9/10 of the law, and nobody's gonna tell Mrs. Marcos to get out. And she just walks me back into this warehouse that she called the mausoleum, past a tennis court that was just covered with leaves. And I have no idea where we're going. And we walk in, and it's a museum to her crimes. Literally tables and tables of papers that the U.S. government collected documenting their money laundering in the Swiss banks. And Andy Bautista would say, she would make what he calls spontaneous admissions, where she would say, my money's in 170 banks and I can't get to it.
Brilliant. Do we have another audience question?
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk about the edit process and structuring the film. There's a lot of threads between present day and verite and archival and her interviews, and I just wanted to hear a little bit about writing it and what that looked like for you.
It was actually really challenging. I think that was a huge challenge for me. I worked with a really brilliant editor, Per Kierkegaard, who we had very different points of view in a way, and we argued a lot, and I think the difference between our points of view kind of made the structure of the film what it is, because in a way it's very different. But it was very challenging because, like I was saying before, I didn't realize to what extent somebody can look to the camera and lie and the audience accepts it. I tried her saying there are no animals on the island while you're seeing the images of the animals, and people would think, oh, well, that was an old shot, like the animals are dead now. So we really had to work into this structure of the truth tellers contradicting what Mrs. Marcos was saying and kind of putting them side by side. And also in terms of starting with the present, but then going to the past, because a lot of people, part of why he won is because a lot of people don't know the history, especially in this country. And in my office, anybody who was less than 20 in 1986 did not know even the name Imelda Marcos. And so we had to kind of bring in the history too, but I didn't want to do it in a kind of chronological, conventional way. So I tried to kind of introduce you to Mrs. Marcos when you didn't know she was a liar and you didn't know that she wasn't a nice old lady. And actually, when I started the film, I didn't know either. I thought maybe this would be her redemption story, but it wasn't. But in structuring it, we kind of discover her and the past as we go. And so that was a big... I think the two big revelations in the structure were the truth tellers and also not putting martial law in the beginning, but putting it about a half an hour in, so you kind of discover her past. But it took 2 years in the edit. It was a very, very tricky edit. And my editor, who came from Copenhagen to work with me, his marriage practically broke apart because it was he was supposed to come for 6 months, and then 2 years later we finished. But they're happily married now.
Speaking about lies, wait until you see tonight's presidential debate. But, given where we are now, given, the film that everybody's just seen, I mean, what do you want people to take away from The Kingmaker in 2024?
I think that you really can't take for granted anything. Like, whatever we fear, we have to really act on those fears and not live in this illusion of it can't happen here, because nobody thought it could happen there. And it did. And not, I mean, even, I showed the film in Washington with Susan Rice moderating when she was National Security Advisor for Obama. And now Biden and Kamala Harris are meeting with Bong Marcos. So the pathway to legitimacy and the kind of short-term memory, and also I think in my age, we kind of grew up thinking democracy was a bedrock and could never falter, and that, we had this constitution and there were just certain things we took for granted. And I think since 2016, we've learned that we can't take those things for granted. And also the power of propaganda and the power of fake news on social media. Like, that, I think, is something where we really don't know what information people are getting and what people are thinking.
So amazing. So incredible to have this conversation with you, 6 years after we first spoke, and see where everything is. But Lauren, I want to congratulate you on The Kingmaker and for telling the story, and of course to everybody for coming out tonight and for your questions. Join us outside. We've got a reception afterwards, and it's always
Thank you,
good to see you.
Jazz.
Congrats. Thank you.